Hey, Normie Gardner here, and I'm going to tell you a story with a moral, okay? Now, this is fiction, it's not real, but I can easily imagine this happening to me. I am a married man. I am married to a beautiful woman. I have 4 children, and they're all young, below the age of 10. I'm also a Catholic, all right? So every week I go to church, all right? I go to my Catholic church, I receive communion, I try to pray. All right, so let's imagine a scenario, okay? Let's imagine a scenario that has not happened to me, but I could easily see happening to me if I'm very unlucky. I go to church with my wife and my 4 kids. I go and receive communion. I go and kneel in the pew. I kneel down and I'm closing my eyes. I'm trying to pray. And I happen to open my eyes and I see walking by me, right in front of me, a teenage girl, 17 or 18 years old, with really short shorts and a low-cut blouse, and my eyes flash to her legs or to her cleavage. And at that moment, right behind her comes her mother, seeing me, a married man with young children and a beautiful wife, staring at her daughter's body. She glares at me. I look embarrassed and look away. After church is over, she comes up to me and said, "How dare you? What kind of scumbag are you looking at my daughter's body like that? How dare you? Don't you have any self-control?" And I may say, "Why is your daughter dressed like that at church?" And she'll say, "It doesn't matter how my daughter's dressed. You should have self-control. How dare you? That's no excuse." And I say, "Well, you know what? She shouldn't dress like that at church." And there's anger, and there's confusion, and there is just the anger will get worse and worse. And so what's happening here? Let's analyze what's happening here in this scenario, which, like I said, hasn't happened to me, but I can imagine it could. And for my male listeners, you can totally understand my point of view. And for my female listeners, you can probably more sympathize with the mother's point of view. So what's going on here? What's the truth? Well, the reason we're in this scenario is because of 2 big problems in the modern world. One is we do not know how human beings work, and 2 is we don't know the difference between men and women. And really, in order to fix this problem, we have to really look deep. And I hope that at the end of this, I'll be able to convince the female members of my audience that there's a reason why you're supposed to dress modestly, and it's actually a good thing and a virtuous thing to do so. And you got to understand that. So, the first problem, we don't understand how human beings work. So, unfortunately, this is going to be a long video because I need to go really, really deep here. I need to talk about the soul. The soul, okay? We got to talk about the soul. Now, the first thing to do when we're talking about the soul is to clear up a huge misconception. When I said the word the soul, you probably thought about some sort of ghostly thing, maybe like a silhouette of a person that's inside of a human body, and then it can leave the human body and come back, and like some sort of weird ghost thing that's probably in like fluorescent green or orange. Stop. That's not what the soul is. It's not a ghost. The soul is not a ghost. Throw that idea away, okay? That is a stupid, absurd idea, and it's not what I'm talking about. When I say the soul, I'm talking about what Aristotle and Aquinas meant by the soul. And it's something that took me a long time to figure out. And just to say some conception, first thing to do is throw away that conception. What the soul is the simplest definition I can give is it is what living things have and non-living things don't, okay? We have this physical world. Some parts of that physical world are alive, are living, and other parts are not. So, a rock is not living. The moss on the rock is. The soul is the difference between the moss and the rock. Get that first. That's what soul means. This is a lot easier to understand when you know what the Latin word for soul is. It's anima. Animal. Anima. It literally means life. Okay? That's what soul means. Now, get that straight first. Now, obviously there are different kinds of living things. There are vegetables, and there are animals, and there are humans, and therefore there are obviously different kinds of souls. The soul is the principle of life. It is the thing that orders material to be alive. Without the soul, the material is no longer alive. And furthermore, what we call the body is a piece of material that is organized and ordered by the soul. And without the soul, that body ceases to be a body. If you, just for example, what happens to a body that is no longer alive? It corrupts, it decomposes, it ceases to be a body. Without the soul, the body can't exist. It literally can't exist. The soul is the principle of the body. It is the form of the body. Without the soul, the body doesn't exist. Now you see now why our conception of the word soul is totally out of whack. The soul is the principle of the body. So everything that's alive has a soul. And there's different kinds of things that are alive, like I said already. Vegetables, animals, humans. A very broad idea, right? So, because there are different kinds of living things, there are different kinds of souls that we have to talk about. And furthermore, the more complex kinds of souls have different kinds of modes of soul. Like, for example, a plant has what we call a nutritive soul. Right here, okay? Plant has a nutritive soul. Whoops. Nutritive soul right here, okay? So, that's what a plant has. Then we have the animal. Nutritive soul, basically, this is the thing, the most basic form of life, the most forming principle of life. For example, in humans, a nutritive soul would be the part of that would be what keeps your heart beating and keeps you breathing. It's the instinct, the lizard brain, the most basic functions of the brain. That's what we would classify as the nutritive soul. Then we have the sensitive soul, right? Sensitive soul. Now, plants do not have a sensitive soul. Bacteria, moss doesn't have a sensitive soul, but animals do. You know, animals are what the sensitive soul is the part of the light of the soul, the aspect of the soul that is moved and is changed by senses, by the things around you. Okay, so hence the word sensitive. Now, don't forget the modern term sensitive. What I mean by sensitive here is it's moved by sense. It can sense things and can move around because of that. So a dog has a sensitive soul. A dog is moved by sense, can sense things, can then react to the sense. Sensitive soul. Finally, we have the rational soul. The rational soul. Now, by rational, I don't mean just like Spock. You know, I just don't mean like 2 + 2 = 4. I mean the rational soul is what men have that dogs don't. We can think abstractly. We also have free will. We can say we have self-awareness. I can say I. The word I doesn't mean anything to a sensitive soul because a sensitive soul lacks the capacity to understand what I means. Self-awareness, free will, all that whole bottle box, that's the rational soul. And that the difference between the rational soul and the sensitive soul can be summed up this way. The sensitive soul is moved by the outside world and material in general, and then directs the body towards that. The rational soul moves the outside world, the material. It is not moved by, it moves. It doesn't depend on the outside world for its existence. It changes the outside world. So I, as a human being, can change the outside world. Whereas a dog, as a sensitive soul only, is changed by the outside world. Not it's you know, instinct rules it. The instinct is based on, well, we'll get into that in a second. You know, that is the difference between a sensitive soul and a rational soul. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's not like they're one or the other. So an animal, a plant, only has the nutritive soul, right? That's why I made this paper to demonstrate this point. The dog has the sensitive soul and the nutritive soul. And the human being has the rational soul, the sensitive soul, and the nutritive soul. Has all three of them. And each part of these souls has control over the body. The body does not have a soul. The body is material, physical things. The soul is a thing that moves material. So, we all have the nutritive soul, we all have the sensitive soul, we all have the rational soul, and all parts of these soul can control the body. The nutritive soul obviously controls the body by making our heart beat. The sensitive soul controls the body by being moved by outside forces in the world and moving this body as a result. The rational soul also controls the body in a different way, by our own will, by our own free will, which is not part of the material world. Our free will is what moves our body. okay? Example of this, me. My heart is beating. It's controlled by the sensitive soul, by the nutritive soul. Okay, that's the principle that's keeping my heart beating and keeping me alive. I'm cold right now. It's freezing cold outside. I want to go like this and keep my hands warm. That's the sensitive soul working, right? Because it feels cold and it's reacting to it. I am making a YouTube video. I am constructing talks. I am moving my hand now because of free will. That is the rational soul doing things. So, remember, right now, we have lost track of this whole idea. We think that we have, the view of the human being the moderns have is, okay, we have, there's this body that's controlled, that's, it was started as an amoeba, then over years it's evolved eventually into an ape, and then suddenly, magically, the ape suddenly has free will and self-awareness, and now that's why we have a human being. So, we are controlled by just a material body, and instincts and hormones, stuff like that. And also, we control what we do ourselves, and, we have free will, and therefore, we can have a justice system. The whole view is incoherent. It makes no sense if you think about it, but we still hold to it. We have to. And this is what draws back to the problems we see in my little story here, okay? At one point, we were saying we are controlled just by material, and the other point we're saying, no, we control our own actions. Well, that view is incoherent because it doesn't make any sense. But if we think of it this way, that the body is controlled by the rational soul and the sensitive soul and the nutritive soul, all three control the body, then we're starting to make more sense. All right, we're starting to actually get to the bottom of my little story. What's happening here? Okay. Another way of looking at it too is that we talk about self-control. Now, we don't talk about self-control to keep our heart beating, and we don't talk about self-control to keep, when I say move, my hand moves. We don't need to worry about that. We control, the rational soul can control the body perfectly fine. I am moving my hand any way I want, right? So what do we mean by self-control? What exactly does that mean? Well, that's when we talk about appetites, okay? So what are appetites? Appetites are what the soul is moved towards, all right? The appetite is the movement of the soul. The soul desires things, okay? Now, the rational soul desires what's true. We want to know what's true. We want truth and goodness. Now, the sensitive soul desires what's suitable for the body, okay? And by suitable, remember, the sensitive soul is not rational. It is not self-aware. It says, okay, this is that's suitable for me, for the body. So the dog desires, a male dog desires to mate with a female dog. That is suitable for dogs and the dog body, all right? The male sensitive soul desires to mate with the female sensitive soul. That's what's suitable for the body of a male, and it's suitable. So it's not saying it's suitable in a way that's rational or moral. It's just that's moving, right? And the nutritive soul, which we don't need to get into anymore, basically desires just the body staying alive. That's what an appetite is. Each of these different souls has different appetites. All right. Now, if everything was perfect with humankind, all these different souls control the body, and they would all work together perfectly. But unfortunately, humankind is broken and messed up, and this are often in conflict. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that we are there. They like one takes control or the other takes control. It's more subtle than that. All right. Now, I'm going to quote something from Aquinas. All right. Oh, before I do that, I need to talk about the appetites. Okay. The appetites of the sensitive soul can be divided in two ways: concupiscence and irascibility. I can never say that thing right. Okay, concupiscence is, this sounds harder than it really is. Okay, so I'm going to break this down. Concupiscence means things that the soul wants to do, that the sensitive soul wants to do, and irascibility means things that the sensible soul does not want to do. So, easy example: a sheep wants to eat grass, and the sheep wants to run away from the wolf, right? First example, concupiscence. Second example, irascibility. Okay, that's what concupiscence and irascibility. Those are the two appetites of the sensitive soul. All right. Now the next question is this: does the sensitive soul obey the rational soul? Well, kinda. It kinda does, and this is the source of all the horrible things about humanity. Does the sensitive soul obey the rational soul? That's the thing we have to focus in on right here, okay? Because the answer is not a clean yes or no. The answer is kinda, a little bit. It depends, So the person to talk to now is Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas was a monk, and he figured this out a long time ago, and he also based what he said on Aristotle, who was a man who lived in Greece like 4,000 years ago, way before any science or anything like that. He figured this part out, and what he said is still true today. So I'm going to quote from Summa theologica. It is from, for those of you who are nerds, it is from Summa theologica, part 1, question 81, article 3, reply to objection 2. Whether the irascible and concupiscible appetites obey reason. Reason is the rational soul. The irascible and concupiscible appetites are part of the sensitive soul, the appetites of the sensitive soul. This is his answer. As the philosopher says, Politics 1:2, we observe in the animal a despotic and a politic principle. For the soul dominates the body by a despotic power, but the intellect dominates the appetite by a politic and royal power. For a power is called despotic whereby a man rules his slaves, who have no right to resist in any way the orders of the one that commands them, since they have nothing of their own. But the power that is called politic or royal, by which a man rules over free subjects, who, though subject to the government of the ruler, have nevertheless something of their own, by reason of which they can resist the orders of him who commands. And so the soul is said to rule the body by a despotic power, because the members of the body cannot in any way resist the sway of the soul. But at the soul's command, both hand and foot, and whatever member is naturally moved by voluntary movement, are moved at once. But the intellect or reason is said to rule the irascible and concupiscible by a politic power, because a sensitive appetite has something of its own, by virtue of whereof it can resist the commands of the reason. I'm going to skip a little part here. Whence it is said, we experience that the irascible, concupiscible powers do resist reason, inasmuch as that we can sense or imagine something pleasant, which reason forbids, or unpleasant, which reason commands. And so by that fact, the irascible and concupiscible resist reason in something, we must not conclude they do not obey. So the answer is, the sensitive soul kind of obeys the rational soul. I'm going to unpack that a little bit here. What Aquinas is trying to get to is that the body, okay, so the rational, the reason, does command the body, right? And it commands the body instantly. My hand cannot choose to disobey me. When I say hand, go towards the camera, it can't disobey. The body is a slave of the rational soul. I can tell if I'm thinking about it, I can tell the body exactly what to do. Now, the appetites, the concupiscible appetite to run away, the desire something, and the irascible appetites to run away from something, those are the rational soul can command those things, but those things sort of have the life of their own, don't they? The old joke about, thinking with your third leg, the whole thing, they seem to have a thing of their own. They can resist about it. Now, the rational soul can force you to do that, yes, but what the analogy really is of a guy who has to convince other guys to do their job. It's an analogy, it's not perfect. Aquinas' analogy is a ruler with subjects as opposed to a ruler with slaves. A ruler with slaves, a despot, the slaves have no choice, they have to obey. Hence the body, my hand, has no choice but to obey my rational soul. But a ruler with subjects, well, the ruler has to use politics to sort of convince and keep them going, and the subjects can actually rebel, and the ruler has to use the art of politics to keep those subjects in line. That is only an analogy, though, right? It's only an analogy. Really, the problem here is that sometimes the rational soul can choose to obey the sensitive soul, and sometimes the sensitive soul itself is not self-aware. It's those appetites are there, but it's not self-aware. The rational soul is self-aware, and the rational soul can choose to be moved by the sensitive soul. Now, let's go back to my little story. The story of I got caught looking at that girl. This again, it's a fictional story, but Any guy can understand this. Now, what happened there is that male concupiscence exist and female concupiscence exist. And they're two different things. Male concupiscence, the male sensitive soul, has a different sort of, it's just different from female concupiscence. Male concupiscence, the desire, the thing that happens, that takes over, is at that moment when let's look at the analysis in that story. When I saw myself, my eyes looking at that teenage girl's body, all right, that was the concupiscent, the sensitive soul taking over. And then all of a sudden the rational soul said, oh, wait, don't do that. So that's what I mean by the rational and the concupiscent souls are sometimes in conflict, right? They are two different things, and they're sometimes in conflict. And that's why human beings have so much trouble with everything, okay? Now, when the mother of the girl came back to me and said, how dare you do that? What she was thinking was that my rational soul was in complete control of my body. My rational soul knew exactly what to do. When I looked at that underage girl's body, I knew exactly what I was doing. And hence, that's the source of her anger. And from her perspective, she was absolutely correct. Now, from the male perspective, the male perspective is my concupiscent soul took over for a second. My sensitive soul's concupiscent appetites took over for a second. And then my rational soul had to rein the soul in, you know? And from the male perspective, I am angry at that girl. This is the anger at thoughts, you see. Because what happens is that we see this as this. I am trying to rein in my appetites. I'm trying to rein in my rebellious subjects. And you're coming in and you're telling my rebellious subjects to rebel. And you're inciting rebellion. And I'm trying to keep them I'm trying to keep these subjects down and try to keep them quiet and say, come on, you stupid idiots, don't do these stupid things. You're going to get in trouble. And you're coming in and you're causing trouble. So from the male perspective, the anger is towards the girl for dressing in that way, because that dressing is inciting rebellion from here, you know? So you see the difference. You see the problem? The reason there's a problem here is my second issue. If you come back to the very beginning of this video, I said there's two problems. We don't understand how human beings work, and we don't understand the difference between men and women, okay? This whole time I've been talking about how human beings work, how the soul works. Now we're going to talk about how the difference between men and women. Now, in order to see the difference, the real difference between men and women is the difference between our sensitive souls. Not our rational souls, our sensitive souls. That's the difference between men and women. And if we don't understand each other, we're going to just keep on getting into these fights. There is a difference between men and women. And the difference is between our sensitive souls. Which makes sense, because the sensitive soul is all about the body and being moved by the material world. Now, in the material world, men and women are different. Our rational souls are indifferent, but our sensitive souls are different. Yeah, and that makes sense, because our sensitive souls are all about material, right? Makes perfect sense. So, let's look at the sensitive soul. The sensitive soul of a man versus the sensitive soul of a woman. The women, well, there's lots of videos about the differences between them, and I think that you probably already know, but let me just go over it, okay? The sensitive soul of a man wants to sire children. The sensitive soul of a woman wants to bear children and be protected from outside forces. That's basically the most basic thing I can think of. That's how the most basic summary of those differences, okay? So if I was to understand this properly, okay, in this scenario, this story, the woman, the teenage girl in this case, she did not ask to be looked at by my concupiscent desire. No, she didn't, okay? However, if you want to see where she was wrong and where modesty comes into play, let's take another scenario, okay? Suppose in this second scenario, this is actually also not true, but it could be true. I'm a teacher who is teaching this girl, okay? Teaching this 17-year-old girl. And in this scenario, you know, I am not related to this girl. She's just my pupil. But I start hanging out with this girl after class. I start treating this girl like, I'm like, hey, man, you know, you're so good looking. she's a good-looking girl, you know. And you know, if I was not married and kids, I would totally want to date you. You know, but of course I wouldn't, because, you know, but, you know, I just want to let you know that you're my friend, and, you know, and I'll protect you, and now I could be saying all these things in theory without any idea of how it's affecting her. But all of a sudden one day, this girl makes a move on me as a teacher. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? How dare, I'm your teacher. What, you want to, like she tries to make a move on me, and I'm angry, and I'm like, what the heck? You're going to ruin my life. How dare you? I am your teacher. And she's like, but I love you. And I'm like, you're crazy. And I get angry. Now, that scenario in the modern world would be very unusual, but it wouldn't be so unusual back in another age or era where we were more favored of the man than the woman. It's different now, but in a different kind of culture, that could be very damaging. Let's look at that scenario. Okay, in that scenario, I could have plausible deniability, say, oh, you know, I never said I never made a move on her. I never had any desire to make a move on her. I was just, you know, I was just sweet. I was just trying to be her friend. You know, I was just telling her, I was giving her compliments, and, you know, I was just trying to be her friend. And all of a sudden she says she's in love with me and she makes a move on me, that she's the predator in this case. Really? Why were you alone with her? Why? That's what a person would say to me. Why were you alone with her? Why were you treating her like a mate would treat, a lover would treat a beloved? Why was I doing that? You see the problem here? I was arousing her concupiscible desires. Her concupiscible sensitive soul was aroused by my actions. And even if I didn't intend to do it, I should have known better than to do that. You know, I should have not been ever alone with her. I should never have treated her like me, a married man, and a teacher in a position of authority, should have never have treated her like a man would treat a woman who he wants to marry and have children with. She saw how I was treating her. Her sensitive soul was inflamed and aroused by my actions. And even if my actions weren't intended for that, they still had an effect, whether I liked it or not. This is where modesty comes into play. This is what modesty is. Modesty really means being charitable to one another. It means not arousing the sensitive soul, not arousing the concupiscence of the opposite. And the reason we get into these problems is that men and women have forgotten what their sensitive souls are different. They're different, okay? So, I'm addressing now the females, the women, the ladies, the fellow human beings who are females, not males. Males have concupiscent desires that we are trying to keep in check. Females have concupiscent desires that they are trying to keep in check. And the way to be modest with each other, the virtue of modesty is really a virtue of love. It is a virtue of understanding and of compassion, and of not inflaming the desires of the opposite sex in a bad way. So, women, to dress modesty is not, we're not going to command it to do that, but the reason we ask you to dress modestly is to don't incite rebellion in our concupiscent desires. We're trying to keep these desires in check. And by you dressing in a way that exposes the body, it arouses the concupiscence that is, you know, that is stupid, that is irrational, that is dumb, but is still very, very powerful. And everyone knows this. And we understand this because we have different kinds of souls. We have the rational soul, we have the concupiscent soul, and we have the vegetative soul. I mean, and all three things are controlling our body, and the problem with humankind is that our rational soul does not completely control the concupiscent soul. It just doesn't. And that's the problem. And that's why we have laws, and that's why we have crimes, and that's why we have all the horrible things that happen, is because the rational soul is not in control of the body all the time. We have to persuade and beat the concupiscence down all the time. So, don't make it harder. Don't make it harder. You know, just think about that when you're doing your actions. Okay? Okay. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel.